This is Test Case Scenario with me, your host, Jason Baum. This podcast is the definitive hub for knowledge and stories in the software testing and development communities. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button and let's dive straight into the episode. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Test Case Scenario. I'm your host, Jason Baum, and with me as always, I'm very excited to say, Marcus Merrell. Yeah, he's been here for all the episodes, and I'm super excited. No, Marcus, I'm excited for you too, but I'm super excited to welcome back Evelyn Coleman to the show. Evelyn, thank you so much for coming back.
I've missed all of you and our listeners.
Yay. So I'm very, very excited to have Evelyn, as you could see, and Marcus. Okay. I love my children equally. That's not true though, right? I mean, no. All right. We won't get into that. All right. And also on our show today, we are super excited to have a very special guest. Joining us from Indeed is David Morgenthaler. David also used to be at Google prior to and is a staff engineer over at Indeed and focused on testing and a test advocate, I am told. So I'm very excited to talk to you, David, and welcome you to Test Case Scenario.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Great. Okay, so we'll just dive right in. Today, we wanted to talk about the topic of continuous quality. So, David, I am told that Indeed kind of just switched some of the way that you all have been focused on CI/CD and bringing continuous quality into the workflow and thought processes regarding how you're testing. And I think I have to start at the basics. What is continuous quality? Or at least what is continuous quality to you and to Indeed?
Well, actually, it's the first time I've heard that term provided in that way. What we've been focusing on is what we call shift left. So rather than users or testers finding bugs after the software has already been released, we want to do more and more testing and static analysis during development. And specifically, we've kind of focused on the merge request because that's sort of a point where all software ought to go through before it gets out to production. So in the merge request, we automatically run pipelines now through GitLab CI. We have templates that set that up so that when you start a new project, it will automatically have this template in place that will run your tests. Well, you still have to write your tests. That's the issue. And that's the thing we're still having some issues with, getting that as part of the culture that, hey, what do you mean you didn't write tests? You have to write tests during development, not later. And I think that's coming. But we also have done a lot of other quality type things. We run static analyzers, security analyzers, and we can put the findings they find into the merge request as comments, line comments specifically for some of the security ones where we say, hey, you have a cross-site scripting vulnerability here. Please remove it. And my team actually wrote that little integration with GitLab. And it's not trivial, as it turns out. One of our values is simplicity. This is a new value for the company, and that means we want basically less chaos, fewer ways to do things, because right now every team has been autonomous and they get to choose their own testing frameworks. They get to choose their own environments to run their tests in, and that was a big problem when everybody chose the common QA. And that meant you were testing your code at the same time other people were testing their code that you depended on. And so, of course, that led to a lot of breakage. So services like Sauce Lab, where they're hermetic, the tests there don't depend on things that are also under test. really improve that ability to get a good signal, less flakiness and more signal.
I'm going to go straight into something real specific, just real quick before we go, because I have some more general stuff. But I'm curious if something like the cross-site scripting deal is it just as simple as something like you're not sanitizing your inputs, or is there more complexity that goes into the analysis of something like that from a static analysis point of view?
Well, that we actually purchased a static analysis tool that does that. So it's that's the basic thing for cross-site scripting. But there's even simpler ones. You have a hard-coded secret, right? Hey, there's a password that you've put into your source code. That's not a good idea.
Right.
So those sorts of things. But
rules-based static analysis engine, do you sort of like enable and disable rules? Do you add your own custom rules? How do you manage that?
Yeah, we don't add any of our own custom rules right now. And in fact, I'm not even sure that that's a capability of the particular tool that we've licensed. But that's really advanced stuff. Generally speaking, we want to follow the CIS 20 guidelines, and the easiest way to make sure you're doing that is to use a sort of industry standard tool that can do that.
Sorry, I went from 10,000 feet to like right above the blades of grass. So if we want to go more general,
I do want to back out a little bit.
Yeah, we should.
And it's just because this is a very interesting topic to me. Marcus knows this because I think I've been beating the topic a bit to death. Actually, Evelyn, you too. I think this was one of the last podcasts that you were on, was when I was challenging shift left testing, because and while I agree with the practice, my background is actually DevOps, so it's ironic for me to be talking about this in this capacity. But I think when it comes to testing, in theory, I think the process makes a whole lot of sense and it's really good. But I think the way we've been adopting it as an industry, I'm almost want to challenge a bit, is because I think we've almost taken it as an excuse to remove QA from the process with the intent of streamlining. But what ends up happening is, and I'm not talking about it Indeed specifically, I'm talking about very generalized, and a concern I would have, and I would love to know how Indeed is like taking this in stride and how it's working within the dev teams and DevX, because I think what ends up happening is a lot of the load ends up on the developer's shoulders. They've already got a lot of load on their shoulders. We did a survey, 77% said, I got more on my shoulders than I did last year. And they're pushing bad code. They're pushing, untested code often. And
not good.
I'm wondering, not good at all. and we're seeing quality, I think, overall in general decreasing. How has the shift internally at Indeed, how have you tried to, I guess, mitigate that from happening?
Yeah, that's the tough one, because when you have two organizations, a QA organization and a software engineering organization, they see their jobs as distinct. And when you put them all together as, okay, software engineers are not only full stack, but also full, lifespan, whatever you want to say, it does feel like it's more burden. Well, the answer to that would be, you just need more software engineers then, because each software engineer is doing two jobs now, and therefore they are not going to be able to do that as quickly. And that's kind of a given. We called an initiative a couple of years ago, Push on Green. The idea being that there would be enough automated tests that when they passed, you could simply go ahead and push to production. You didn't have to worry. Well, in theory, that's great, but you always, almost, especially for something with a UI, you always need eyes on that. It's not going perfectly yet, but I think there's especially from management, from senior management, there's a big push because of the research done on the door metrics, right? Which basically showed that if you have certain sorts of capabilities, you're going to have a faster delivery and less errors and faster time to recovery and all that. And I think we as an industry have taken that seriously. I'm not quite sure, though, that we realize that that doesn't mean you should just go and look at your Dora metrics and say, well, your Dora metrics are bad, now make them better, right? Because there were clear capabilities that caused the metrics to get better. That research was done over, 50,000 engineers or something. So when you've got a company with a couple thousand engineers, you just don't have the law of large numbers on your side. So you're not really going to be able to look into those Dora metrics and say, aha, look, this team didn't write tests. They were faster and they didn't have any errors. So therefore, nobody should write tests.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I have a similar question about that, though, is like, as we're shifting left and putting more on the developers, do you ever feel tempted to add more checks along the pipeline, to add more tools, to make it better, like to increase the quality? And how do you balance that temptation with the initiative for simplicity?
It's not just a temptation. That's actually one way to shift left more effectively, is to have more automation, things like static analysis tools, checks for your code coverage. How much coverage do you have? Is it going up or down? If it's going down over time, well, that means people are not writing tests for their new features or for their changes, and that you can see that then. Not that code coverage is the be all and end all, but it is a signal. And so, well, one of the things that my specific team, we're called product quality, but what we're working on right now is that injection of more information into the merge requests. So whether it's the static analysis for security vulnerabilities, or I just found an interesting one that we wrote a little platform that allows us to do these, and we had a problem with package JSON files. We were using the package JSON files for Node.js libraries to determine where they came from, because there's an attribute you put in there called repository, which says this is a repository. Well, unfortunately, that is a manually curated file and value, and no one checks it. And so as things move around, people copy templates and things. They don't change that. And so you lose the connection between, hey, that library in our repository versus, where did it come from? And it was really easy to write a little check at merge request time that would read all the package JSON files in your repo and say, oh, wait, this one has the wrong repository value. And in tools like GitLab, you can actually, we haven't done this yet, but you can actually do a code change suggestion that the author can apply, and poof, it adds a commit to the merge request, which can fix that.
That sounds like a nice open source tool.
Yeah. I used to work at Google, and they have a tool there called Tricorder, which basically does exactly that. And now with AI, you can also add code suggestions. Hey, did you know you could refactor this like this? Or I know there was a paper recently they wrote about how they had AI look at developer suggestions in code reviews and then say, okay, well, let me see if I can implement that. So that's all coming, and that's all shift left, right? Because that's all things that are going to improve the code base and the tests. By the way, I asked Cody to write some unit tests for me in Python, which I wasn't familiar with the particular frameworks there, and it did a great job. There was a little error there, but it compiled, they ran, they passed. Unfortunately, they passed a little too much, so I had to fix them so they would fail. But I think that's really where the future is going to be. It's going to be shifting left and shifting those checks left, saying, I'm sorry, Dave, I can't let you push that code. You didn't write unit tests here. Let me do that for you. What do you think? Accept, right? I mean, that's something I can see in another year or two will be all the rage, right? Why should I write a unit test if the AI can write it for me? Especially if it's exactly the same type of test that's been written 100 times in this project or this repo or whatever. Why should I manually figure that out?
That makes sense. So it's more simplicity for the developers and for the day-to-day actions of the users, rather than I could argue, or someone might argue, that depending on more tools and depending on more frameworks and building these things out, like, could also be seen as more complexity. But if we're defining simplicity as what does the day-to-day life of the engineers look like, how can their day be smoother? How can they not have to go manually add that repo number to that field? Then yeah, I think that makes sense to me.
Yeah, it's the man behind the curtain problem, right? You're doing magic, and somebody has to be able to look back there and see how it works. But well, compilers are the great example, right? They are getting so good now. Well, Kotlin's a great example, right? You don't need to declare your types, which I find a problem because I want to see what the types are, right? And going back and figuring out how to do the type inference can be kind of a pain. But yeah, if the machine can do it, why not let the machine do it? And that takes a little bit more burden off the. We don't yet have the fourth, fifth generation languages in regular use, right? But I think they are coming, and they'll be driven by AI, and the testing will be driven by AI too. I hope.
Expand on that, please. How else do you see AI or machine learning playing a role here?
Oh, it's going to be very slow. You're going to have slam dunks like Cody, like Copilot, and there'll be certain things they do really well, and everybody will learn that, and everybody will use that, and then I think it will sort of become so automated you won't even have to push the button or ask it, right? It'll just do it.
Is that a risk for, everybody's like, is it going to take our jobs? Do you think that's the case, or?
No, absolutely. Actually, I mean, it might take certain QA, low-level QA jobs, right? Entry-level QA jobs. But I don't think it will take software engineering jobs because it doesn't know what to write. It doesn't know what the users want, what the direction of the company is. I don't think it will ever really be able to figure that out. So I think software engineers are always going to have to write something. It won't necessarily be code, but it will be the instructions on what to build and how to build it. Hey, we don't write in assembly language anymore, right? That was 50, 60 years ago. That was how you wrote software. Did that when we had higher level languages that were macro assemblers and C, did that remove people's jobs? No, it actually created more jobs because there was more capability and people wanted more.
Yeah, that's a theme I've been hitting on a lot lately, is that we expect the capabilities to increase. There's been a huge concern around things like efficiency and CPU and power consumption, and everyone says, well, they're getting more efficient. And I'm like, yeah, but the problem set that we're asking of it is going to increase tenfold while the efficiency increases onefold. And so we're not going to be solving the efficiency problem all that well, I don't think. But I mean, it's a concern. It doesn't mean don't do it. It just means like we need to think more about these kinds of things that as they're happening.
Yeah, I think you're right. And remember, Moore's law is still in effect. It's just, it takes 2 years to double the processing power or to reduce the cost per flop or whatever it is. But 'twas ever thus. I mean, I can remember 20 years ago, there was this problem that, oh, hey, we can write this fancy UI, but it's too slow, right? The software was always too slow. But of course, look at the incredible increase in processing power over the last, 50 years, if you want to go all the way back to Gordon Moore.
Mm-hmm. We seem to always prioritize speed over quality. Do you think that's true? Do you think we're making a shift? Do you think that the incident that just took place, the major global outage, do you think that's going to change things, or do you think speed's always going to take the lead here?
Yeah, speed will always take the lead because it's a competitive environment, and first mover always gets an advantage. So even if you've got a fail whale, right, you're going to put that out there because what you're providing is, if it is groundbreaking, right, then people will flock to it. What's the build a better mousetrap quip? But maybe it's a people trap, not a mousetrap.
No, my brain got stuck when we talked about like the first to market and all of that stuff. My brain went to this, like, it's especially true for video games, and that sometimes the marketing power of something, whether it's a game or a feature, can outpace the quality.
Always.
Yeah, we're seeing that a lot
Salespeople
right
are
now.
always selling the sizzle before there's even a steak.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
afraid of
absolutely.
that, though. I'm afraid of that as the industry, as the world has changed. Everything is software. Like we just put out a blog post recently. It's called "Everything is Software and Everything is Broken," and that is so true, right? Like we have your smartwatch connected to your phone, connected to your refrigerator. It's running your washing machine. It's it's controlling the iPad that someone's going to be using to give someone their health stat. Like everything is
Yes. And it's all
connected,
crash and
everything is
burn,
software.
right?
And it's
Mhm.
all broken.
Well, so here's the problem. Software engineers don't scale. We are not having enough children, and they don't grow up fast enough to,
And they don't study
Uh,
computer science.
well, maybe, but that's not going to change. But with AI, we can grow that exponentially.
Hmm.
I mean,
Do we
certainly in
lose
the last-
creativity?
Oh, no. I've seen a lot of five-legged dogs and cats to think that's pretty creative, right? I'm not sure AI can count yet, but it can do a lot of other things. So there's clearly another level of processing in our brains that AI is not, or at least neural net AI is not capable of. And I saw Steve Yegi from SourceGraph had a blog where he and his colleague talk about the Normsky architecture for AI, right? Where it's partially Peter Norvig style neural nets and partially Chomsky style language processing. And because of course, computer language is all about counting, right? You have to count the number of parentheses and braces, right? So if you can't count that, you can't write good code. And so that might be the limiting factor for something like a Cody, unless you can also include other components, which is supposedly what they're trying to do. So maybe I'm rambling here and going off the track, but I do believe that the processing power available in AI is still growing by leaps and bounds. And that's not true about the processing power in the human brain and in software engineering brains. I think we've kind of maxed out the percentage of the population that wants to be software engineers, quite honestly.
Yeah, it's been headed that way for a while.
Exactly. And the population will start to decline in the whole world in 30, 50 years or something. So we're going to need helpers,
Absolutely.
robot coders, whatever.
What in your opinion though, when we talk about, the direction this is going and AI and the speed, if something like the global outage that just occurred, if that's not the signal that, maybe we've outrun our headlights, what do you think the signal would be that we've overdone it with speed over quality? What do you think that is? It a global signal, or is it a signal just like for a particular company that they could look at?
No, I think the signal would be a larger scale failure. For instance, the Texas power grid issue back during the winter and then last summer or this summer. Yes, that was just okay, 50, 100 people died, whatever. But that was kind of small. It's like when New York City goes down, it's going to take some kind of break of some form, whether it's in communications or power or whatever. And that will make everybody say, whoa, we're going too fast. We're out on that branch and it's breaking, right? It's sad to say, but it's typical boom and bust, right? Hey, the stock market's at 10 times what it ever was. And then the next day, it just dropped, 90%, something like that.
I think that power outage was.
Yeah, we're just going to continue in the way we're going, right? If you see that as lower and lower quality and more garbage, yeah, maybe that's what it is. But eventually, somebody will get called on the carpet. Congressional testimony, right? They'll put Zuckerberg up there and go, "How come Facebook went down when I was trying to communicate with all my constituents?" And then he'll say, "Well, yeah. You need to pass a law that says we have to have more QA people," or whatever it is. The industry is not going to do it because of competition, right? Capitalism does not want to say, well, we're the safest. We're MySpace, right? We're totally safe.
I feel like hovering around this is a little bit more specific topic because once again, I drill in. I worked at a major e-commerce company 10 years ago in the Austin area. And I remember at one point we had a bunch of Indeed folks over for a meetup, and we were sort of shooting the breeze with a bunch of engineers over there. And we had just built this kind of interesting in-house engine that allows us to do lots of experimentation for not only for functionality and feature flagging, but also for like conversion lift and trying to get better engagement, experimenting with traffic and stuff like that. And we were like, we're able to get 2 to 3 experiments in production at a time right now. How many do you guys do? And somebody Indeed said like 70. So we're like, oh, okay. All right, great. I'm wondering, how do you tend to use experiments? And then more importantly for our listeners in the practical aspect, how do you test for all of that variability and like time loom Loki style of infinite branching possibilities? How do you manage that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So one thing is we have many separate executables. There's sort of a microservices architecture, but also there are even different UIs, right? I mean, you're the user. If you're a company who's trying to hire, you have something different. And so there's a bit of partitioning involved there. Also, I think those 70 experiments are probably much narrower than the 2 or 3 that you were doing. That they're on this flow. If we have this as a checkbox instead of a radio button, does that something like that, or the classic, well, is my bike shed blue or green? Which one do people like better? Yeah, it is tough, and in fact, it's kind of funny you should mention that. We call that the system's called Proctor for doing these tests, and it's a global system where you can register your proctors and whether they are active or inactive, and various different parameters. And as a engineering productivity or developer productivity person, I don't use that because, of course, we don't have enough. Even with thousands of engineers, we don't have enough signal for that to work. You need millions, if not billions, of hits to make that really work well. And that's probably one of the things. I think that Indeed probably, as the number one job site, has a lot more traffic, and it's very specific traffic for jobs than an e-commerce site, except maybe Amazon, of course. So what do we do with proctors? Right now, there's this issue of dead proctors or stale proctors, right? Somebody created an experiment but then they haven't turned it on. Or they finished and they turned it off. It's like, I don't want to remove it, right? That's work. So this is technical debt. It's lying around in the code. And it also costs money because that global system actually, goes and stores things and tries to call things. And so there's a global cost to that too. So as part of this product quality platform, we call it, that we're running inside of GitLab for every merge request, the Proctor team went and wrote a command line tool that will tell you if your Proctor tests are stale. And if they are, they have a way to remove them because, of course, they are in small chunks of code. They'll generate a merge request for each one you want to remove. Well, if we can put that in the merge request, right, we can say when someone opens a merge request in a particular repo, hey, you have 5 stale Proctor tests. Do you want to remove them? Because it can run the checker, and then it can run and say, okay, here's the 5 merge requests. Why don't you go and see if their tests pass? And if so, go ahead and merge them. So this is the kind of thing my team can do to help with the proctors. The question of how come those 70 proctors don't conflict? Well, they actually might. And I'm sure we've probably had a few bugs caused by that. But in the big picture, it hasn't been a problem yet. Now, of course, if something were to bring down Indeed or any other website because of some framework like that, that would cause a huge amount of focus on making sure that couldn't happen in the future. But it hasn't happened. And so,
So more generally,
crossed.
Yeah. More generally, do you think it was worth Indeed spending all the time and effort to build that kind of thing? Or would you, if you had to do it over again, would you have gone back and bought something off the shelf instead?
Gee, I'm not sure we could buy something off the shelf.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, I think it's great for incremental improvement, right? So there's 2 things you want in software. You want innovation, and you want incremental improvement. If you go back and look at the first patents for things like cars and I don't know whatever, printers or whatever, they were awful. But then there was this huge amount of incremental improvement on it. And I guess that's getting you back to the innovator's dilemma, right? From Christensen back, this is 30 years ago. Back in the old days, Sonny, if you're just totally focused on those sorts of incremental improvements, you're going to end up eclipsed by somebody else. So you need both. You need totally new, Wild West, hey, let's try this. But then you also need the refinement you can get from those tests. So I think it's worked well for Indeed, because I think it really has helped us hone in on exactly what users and companies want to do that matching. Again, I'm not doing that matching because I'm the dev prod person, I guess. Not quite DevOps, but in that field more than in the external user field.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate the conversation, David, and for you coming on Test Case Scenario. This has been a really great conversation. I think it's really interesting to me when these things are going right. Because I've heard so much recently where we've had some difficulty with the whole shifting left and whether or not it's done correctly and do we mean it when we say we're going to shift left and
well, we've been doing it for we've been working on it for several years.
Sure.
So it's not something you can do in 1 year. That's for sure. It's a culture change, right? Yeah. You're changing the mindset of, oh, that's right. It's not necessarily test-driven development, which is kind of one extreme end of it, but it's also not fire and forget. Right. That's the important thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, David. And it's been great having you on the show.
Look forward to coming back some other time.
Awesome. Yes, we would love to have you. And that was David Morgenthaler. Thank you again. And thank you for listening to another episode of Test Case Scenario. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us on Test Case Scenario. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'll make sure to respond to each and every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to keep in touch. If you missed our last episode, it's popping up on your screen right now. Go, click it. Until next time on Test Case Scenario.